Welcome to part one of a two-part video. This video is about determining the test for chlorine ions, sulfate ions, and iron ions. The reason we're testing for these three things is that in part two, we're going to be testing water samples and other unknowns to find out which of them have chlorine in them, which of them have sulfate, and which of them have iron. We picked these three ions because chlorine often ends up in the water system due to water treatment procedures and then water ending up in natural sources. So we want to see if that's happened. Sulfate often is runoff from farms or fertilizers or other chemicals that have been used, and if they have ended up in our water system. And iron often ends up in water systems due to rusting metals that have been left around in garbage on farms, abandoned cars, and none of that is very good for the environment, so it allows us to look for that as well. The first part, though, is to find out which of these three chemicals, silver nitrate, barium chloride, and potassium thiocyanate, which of these will test for iron, which will test for chlorine, and which will test for sulfate. So that's what we want to start off with. So the first one we're going to use is silver nitrate. So I'm going to put silver nitrate in all three of these wells, and then we're going to add our knowns. We know that this first chemical has chlorine in it, so if there's a chemical reaction, we know what the positive test for chlorine would look like. In the second one, we're going to add a known version of sulfate to see if this reacts to sulfate. And the third one, we're going to add iron nitrate to see. Now, do notice iron nitrate in the bottle is a yellowy orange color, so don't be fooled by color. You're looking for color change here. The second test on this well over here is we're going to use these three wells. And for these three wells, we've added barium chloride because we want to see if barium chloride tests for chlorine, sulfate, or iron. So I will add our known source of chlorine. Then I will add our known source of sulfate. And then we will add our known source of iron to see if there's any change. And then finally, we will look at our last one and see for potassium thiocyanate if there's any reaction. So we're going to add our known source of chlorine. We're going to add our known source of sulfate, and we're going to add our known source of iron. Now we're looking for color changes, remember, and only one of these three tests for chlorine. So if you look down the row, you should be able to see what that is. Only one of these three shows a positive test for sulfate, so you should be able to look down the row and see what that is. And then only one of these three gives a positive test for iron, so you should be able to look down the row and see what that is. So at this point, make note of which of these tests for chlorine, which one tests for sulfate, and which one tests for iron. And if you're interested, come back for part two, and you'll be able to see how we test the waters.